Alright guys, welcome to Crash Course My Style for my notes. This is biology. This is going to be 8 to 10% of your AP test. On your upcoming test, this will be about 60% of your next test. So you're going to look at 60% of your questions coming out of biology and 20% out of history and 20% out of research methods. When you look at biology, you're going to look at the biology as the behavior and mind and how all this works together. So you're going to try to figure out why things that happen in the mind affect our personality and how it works. Also, this is biological psychology, and we want to figure out the links of all these things and how they work together. So we want to understand how these links affect the way we act and affect the way we talk to each other. And one of the things that we first want to look at is neurocommunication. And this is that the human brain is a complex system of neural pathways. As you guys all know, there's a bunch of stuff going on in here, and the body's composed of a bunch of cells, and everything talks to one another. And the neurons talk to each other, so we try to make sure that everything runs at an optimal pace and everything works out well. Specific brain systems or specific parts of the brain are going to have different functions and different aspects of what they control with our body. It's going to integrate information to construct our experiences, so it's going to take all the stuff in, it's going to construct it, and then that's what we understand is what's happening. The parts of the brain that are going to deliver the messages are going to be called the neurons, and these are nerve cells. And when you look at a neuron, there's comprised of different parts of it that have different meanings and different parts that they can do. The dendrites are going to be the bushy fibers, and these are the ones that receive the information. And they're going to receive the information from another neuron, and they're going to start passing it through. The axon is the cell fiber that passes the message. The myelin sheath is the little thing on the outside of the axon out through here. And this right here is sort of going to make sure everything stays in. It's sort of closes everything in, but also the message when it goes through is make sure that the message is clear, that it's a positive message. Action potential is the message actually traveling down through the neuron. They sort of generate electricity, so as the message comes in, you have a positive charge comes in, there's a negative charge comes out. Sorry. The message is actually nothing but a positive charge, and they're going to generate electricity. Refractory period is a resting pause, so as the positive message comes down through the neuron, it'll be followed by a negative charge, which is called a refractory period. The threshold is when it meets the end where it can actually be transferred over, and this is where we can deliver a neural impulse. The all or none response is it's either going to fire or it's not going to fire. It's going to either deliver the message or not deliver the message. What you need to know from me is basically the dendrite, the axon, the myelin sheath, and the axon terminal. And axon terminal is basically where the message is delivered from, and as it connects up to another dendrite. How neurons are going to communicate. Neurons are so intertwined, it's hard to see where neurons really are. You have to see a really good microscope to be able to see how that works out. The synapse is the meeting point between neurons. So the synapse, if you want to go back to here, this slide, the synapse is going to be between the dendrites and axon terminals as they actually come together. The synapse is going to be that little area sort of in between my fingers. So that's where the synapse is going to be at. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that cross the synaptic gaps between neurons. And remember that the messages move at a speed of 400 feet per second. And reuptake is the neurotransmitter's reabsorption by sending the neuron. There are different types of neurotransmitters out there, so as everything's moving along, there's different types of neurotransmitters that can play different roles. Acetylcholine plays a role in learning and memory. There is a huge list right here, which I would always say, hey, take this, pause it, write all this stuff down, make sure you can get all this information. The brain does produce its own opiates, and these are the things that sort of sit there and try to manage different things for us. Sorry about that. Endorphins are natural opiate-like neurotransmitters that are linked to pain control and pleasure. So this is sort of going to fire when we're happy. They're going to fire when you get hurt sometimes. Drugs and other chemicals do affect the brain. I told you the number one thing that affects the brain for me is, of course, caffeine. It speeds up the neurotransmitters, but therefore, whenever I get off my coffee, I have a small crash. Obviously, that's probably should look at other things. An agonist is a molecule that stimulates a response at receptor sites. An antagonist is they bind receptors, but their effect is to block a neurotransmitter functioning. So they're going to have all these things that happen, and their goals are either to speed up or slow down or block messages. And these are things that come in and they inhibit or prohibit the body from working like it should. Their nervous system is how the body's BD electrochemical networks, all this is going to be passed along. You have a central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is the sensory motor neurons that connect to the rest of the body so we can make sure we get everything across. The nerves are electrical cables. These sort of just pass along the messages for us. Sensory neurons carry messages from the body's tissues to the spinal cords. We've got motor neurons that carry instructions from the nervous system to muscles and glands, and interneurons, which is the sensory motor output is regulated. The peripheral nervous system is composed of two components. Somatic is voluntary control of muscles. Remember, when we think of soma, we're going to think of body. Autonomic controls our glands and muscles of our internal organs. So you've got two going to be the outside and the inside, more or less, if you want to look at it just from a very basic standpoint. And your somatic is going to work the way that you work. Autonomic is going to be your sort of your breathing and your sweating and regulations. Autonomic nervous system has two functions. Sympathetic nervous system arouses and expands energy. This is what happens when we get excited, when we're happy. We get excited about a new Star Wars movie coming out in December. The parasympathetic nervous system helps our body regulate and decreases our heartbeat and lowers the blood sugar to make sure that we're optimizing and we're working at the pace that we should. The central nervous system is composed of the brain, and neural networks are going to comprise all the brain's working. The spinal cord sort of connects the PNS in the brain, but it sort of delivers the messages back and forth. This is why when you get paralyzed, you cannot walk. And reflexes are automatic responses to stimuli. This is why when you go to the doctor, kicks you on the knee, your knee pops off, and there you go, because the information is just going to travel instantaneously. But there is a small delay. The endocrine system is the body's second communication system. This is going to deal with your hormones, chemical messengers that affect other tissues, including the brain, that outlast neural messengers, and the upset feelings may linger. This is why sometimes when you get upset about something or you get mad about something, those feelings may last because those messages are still there. They're still there. Your neural messages have gone, you've forgotten, you've already moved on. The endocrine message is saying you had a bad day. Those are still there, so your bad day still for you is there. Adrenal gland is about the kidneys. Pituitary gland is, so remember, the pit boss. This is controlling everything. This is sort of that big one right there. So the brain goes straight to pituitary, but goes to the other glands. So pituitary is your big gland for all this nature right here. What we are doing now is we're starting to examine heads. Some of you guys know that if something happens, if you have a concussion, if you've been watching football, you realize that this is a concussion. Now, another thing is a lesion, which is tissue destruction, which happens sometimes to people. And so what we do is we try to analyze and see what's going on with the brain. So there's different ways we do that. There's the EEG, which is read out the electrical activity in the brain. There's a CT scan. It takes x-ray photos of the brain. There's a PET scan, which talks about glucose. An MRI, which is a computer-generated scan of the brain's anatomy. And a functional MRI, which is the blood flow and brain function. So you have different levels depending on what you want to look at. If you're hypoglycemic, you might want to take one as glucose. If you've had one that a lot of times you hear people taking CT scans, so you want to see if they've had a concussion or where the damage is. EEG, they want to see maybe if you're epileptic or something like that, they want to see where those energy levels really are at the brain at that time period. There's different structures of the brain. The brainstem is the oldest and the central part of the brain, and it is the automatic survival functions. The medulla is, unless you watch The Water Boy, is the base of the brainstem and it controls the heartbeat and breathing. And the thalamus is sort of one of the big deals in this one also. It controls the center, egg-shaped, and it receives all senses but smell. Remember, smell does not go through that, but the rest of the ones do go through that. Reticular formation is a nerve network. This deals with arousal again. This is when we get excited and the body is getting to that excited point. And the cerebellum are the two baseball-sized parts of the lower brain. And this is going to deal with sensory input. The limbic system is the newest and highest region. It's the central hemispheres. It's located, it deals with emotions. How we feel. The amygdala is going to deal with aggression and fear. The hypothalamus is going to deal with the way our body works with each other and regulates the body. Hippocampus is memory, so everybody remember say hippocampus and say memory because that's going to be one of the big ones. And pituitary, yet again, is the master pit. It's the master pit pulse. It's going to control everything. It is the master endocrine gland. All right, guys. So this time we're going to look at the cerebral cortex regions. Cerebral cortex is a thin surface layer on interconnected, so it's going to be sort of on top of everything. The glial cells are going to be cells that can support, nourish, and protect neurons by learning and thinking. Now, your major lobes, so all this is sort of going to encompass the brain, and then we're going to have to look at the brain. So when you look at the brain, make sure I get it on the camera. Remember where your frontal lobes are, your parietal lobes, occipital lobes, and temporal lobes. So frontal, occipital, eyes in the back of your head, parietal, and then right there is your temporal. If you want to think of frontal as front, temporal is right above your ears, so that controls your tempo. Remember, we talked about people that have vertigo and they can't sing. Eyes in the back of their head, and you only got one more left, and that's parietal. Pop the parietal. Your functions of the cerebral cortex is the motor cortex, so an area at the rear and frontal lobes that controls voluntary movements. The brain is going to sit there and get microelectrodes that can detect well enough to control events. So the brain is the major aspect of all this. Sensory functions, the pin field specializes in receiving information from the skin senses and the movement of body parts. Somatosensory cortex. Ugh. Association areas are the areas that are not involved in primary motor or sensory controls. Our brain is sculptured by genes, and the brain has this really cool thing called plasticity, which means that basically one part of the brain, body doesn't need that brain. It can control other parts. So those people who don't have a sense, they can supposedly their other senses are stronger. Those people who might lose a body part, their other body parts will compensate with that brain plasticity. It'll be able to control it better off. Severed neurons do not regenerate, and some brain functions do have definite functions, but those brain body parts that have not been used can be used for other things, so they can become available for other aspects of it, which is just really fascinating to me. If part of the brain can be damaged, the other part can be reassigned to an extent. Neurogenesis is the formation of new neurons that can sometimes happen. If you can figure out how to do this, let me know. I need some new neurons myself. All right, looking at the brain, if you can remember this right here, this is a part of the body or the brain that connects each other. This is called the corpus callosum. Sometimes this is split. Do you remember how we talked about the right eye is controlled by the left, sends messages to the left brain, and the left eye sends messages to the right brain? And we look at the Gazzaniga experiments where they talked about how the people who had severed callosum because of epileptic reasons, they had split brain. So they were talking about the strengths and the differences of it, which is where we go later on to Broca and Wernicke. Consciousness is our awareness of ourselves and our environment. So as we know everything, are we truly aware of our environment, or this is one of those people who can play some magic tricks on us? Cognitive neuroscience is the study of brain linked with cognition. And dual processing is the principle that information is often simultaneously processed on separate conscious and unconscious tracks. What you are aware of and what you are not aware of in sub-processing information. In everyday life, we function like an automatic point-and-shoot camera, but with manual conscious override. So you pay attention to what you want to pay attention to, so you guys will know. And sometimes you can just get glimpses of everything, but you don't really capture the total message. Genes, we look at genetics. Genetics is the code of our life. We do have the environment, which external influences. So this goes back to the nature versus nurture conversation. Chromosomes are thread-like structures made of DNA molecules that contain genes. DNA is this little fun little thing right here. If you ever watched Jurassic Park, they have a cooler picture of it. And genes are units of heredity that make up DNA. Twins and adoption studies give us the ability to watch nature versus nurture and see what really changes one, because we supposedly have the same genetic makeup and what happens with the nurture and how things are changed. Identical twins are two genetically identical organisms, and fraternal twins they have different makeups. Separated twins are really, really cool to look at. I will remind me, and I'll put an article up about that because it's a really fun thing to look at how people are very similar alike, even though they live different places. The new frontier is molecular genetics, and they study molecular structure and function of genes and how human traits can be influenced by teams of genes. So you're looking at how genetics and makeups come into play as far as our function and the way we have everyday life. Hereditability is the extent to which variation among individuals can be attributed to their differing genes. So we're going to be looking at how things can do this. Would be recessive genes and primary genes. The last couple of slides we're going to go over